Welcome to the Brain Initiative Advanced Postdoctoral Career Transition Award to Promote Diversity, K99, R00 Technical Assistance Webinar. Today we will talk about the Brain Initiative. We'll go through the objective of the program. We will talk a little bit about the eligibility for the program. We'll go through the components of the application, and then we'll have some time for questions. Our speakers today will be Dr. Mariah Bittman, Dr. Nancy Desmond, Dr. Michelle Jones-London, Dr. Ned Talley, and myself, Dr. Lauren Ulrich. Now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Mariah Bittman to tell us about the Brain Initiative.
The Brain Initiative is a 10-year effort to accelerate the development and use of tools to improve our fundamental understanding of how the human brain and nervous system function in health and disease. The long-term goal of this initiative is to come up with a comprehensive understanding of the brain in action, and this is spanning molecules, cells, circuits, systems, and behavior. There are 7 high-priority research areas outlined in the Brain 2025 report, and you can find the link to this report in the RFA. We encourage you to read it since it's important that projects address how the research is aligned with the brain priority areas and goals. There's a new working group also currently assessing brain's progress to identify key opportunities of these new and emerging tools, and that report should be out early next year. There are 7 high-priority research areas of the brain, as I mentioned. The first is to discover diversity, and this is identifying and providing experimental access to different brain cell types to determine their roles in health and disease. The second is creating maps at multiple scales to generate circuit diagrams that vary in resolution from synapse to whole brain. Looking at number 3 is the brain in action, producing a dynamic picture of the functioning brain, developing and applying improved methods for large-scale monitoring of neural activity. The fourth is demonstrating causality, linking brain activity to behavior with precise interventional tools that change neural circuit dynamics. 5 is to identify the fundamental principles. So this is conceptual foundations for understanding the biological basis of mental processes through development of new theoretical and data analysis tools. 6 is advancing human neuroscience. This is developing innovative technologies to understand the human brain and treat its disorders, and also to create and support integrated human brain research networks. And the last one is to integrate these tools and conceptual approaches from the first 6 goals to discover how dynamic patterns of neural activity are transformed into cognition, emotion, perception, and actions in health and disease. So, and then in addition to the 7 priority areas, we also wanted to briefly draw your attention to neuro ethics, which, though not a research priority area, is a program that's integrated in the Brain Initiative. And these components can be integrated in your proposal and includes, but not limited to, these 3 bullets. So identifying considerations that are associated with areas of Brain Initiative research, identifying ethical questions raised by Brain Initiative projects that point to a need for neuroethics research, and also conducting empirical research related to brain imaging and modulation, data privacy, or technology supported by the Brain Initiative. And I encourage you to learn more that you can find at the links below to both the Neuroethics Division of the Brain Multi-Council Working Group and also previous funding opportunities in neuroethics.
Okay, next we have Dr. Michelle Jones-London, who's going to take us through the program objectives and eligibility.
So thank you, Mariah, for that nice overview of the Brain Initiative. And one of the things that I'd like to say before I delve into talking more about the Brain Initiative Diversity K99 R00 FOA is that when we talk about the Brain Initiative, we really are talking about a collective of these institutes that you see displayed on the slide. So unlike the parent K99 R00, where normally you would be gearing your application towards one of the NIH institutes or ICs, with the Brain Initiative, any application coming into this K99 R00 FOA really must fulfill those Brain Initiative research areas. you are not applying to just one specific IC. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about the FOA itself, or the objectives of the FOA. So the objective of this brain diversity FOA is really designed to assist transition to secure faculty positions, enhance the diversity of faculty researchers, and enhance the skills needed to progress to independent NIH or other research support funding. The Brain Initiative K99 R00 also aligns with the vision of NIH leadership, that is to really focus on these transitions across career stages and provide the inputs to really help the career pathway. It is envisioned that funding support from this program will enhance the pool of well-trained researchers who are then able to compete competitively for research opportunities available under the Brain Initiative. So why did we create this program? What was the need? The need really came out of the fact that if you look at, especially for underrepresented groups and diversity, that there is a large loss of talent as we go from the transition from postdoc to junior faculty. For underrepresented groups, especially with regards to race, ethnicity, persons with disability, you see this represented by some of the NSF numbers going from 12% to 5%. But even for women who, at the earlier career stages of undergraduate and graduate, make up almost half of the representation, this drop-off still exists, with the representation being only 18% of full professors in biomedical sciences. Therefore, this program hopes to shore up that drop-off point and make sure that people can make the transition from postdoc to junior faculty. With regards to eligibility, I've already touched on some of the groups, but I'll go into further detail. In order to be eligible for this Brain Initiative FOA, you must identify yourself as a postdoctoral fellow. And you must have less than 5 years of research experience. Keep in mind that this is different than the parent K99 R00 that has 4 years. This one is less than 5 years. And in terms of this being an appropriate mechanism for you, you must require at least 12 months of training. With regards to eligible individuals, there will be 3 different categories. Individuals from underrepresented racial and ethnic groups. As you see on the slide, we have a notice that outlines what groups compose that sort of category. But knowing that most of the people that apply for this will fall under categories defined by NSF data. The other group that we have is individuals with disability, and that's defined as those with a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And for the purposes of this specific FOA, we consider women who may not fall into the other 2 categories that I've just mentioned as eligible for this FOA. Please note that for other diversity Ks within the NIH space, women may not be included. So this is something specific for the Brain K99 R00. The other eligibility category that you want to think about is that it must be applicable to the Brain Initiative research areas. And Mariah did a nice job of going over some of the goals of the Brain 2025 report. The way that you can assure yourself that indeed the research is appropriate is that you can send us a draft of your specific aims, and we will help you with that. The other point that I'd like to highlight here for eligibility is that you do not have to have a neuroscience PhD. The scope and the reach of the Brain Initiative extends beyond just neuroscience research areas. We are encouraging those with engineering backgrounds, computer science, statistics, mathematics, physics, chemistry, and also neuro ethics to consider this a space in which they could be competitive and should be encouraged to apply. The other thing is that you must be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident by the time of the award. and any K99 R00 under the BRAIN initiative must be coming from a U.S. domestic institution. In terms of the format of this mechanism, this is where you'll see the similarities with the parent K99 R00. That is, this will be funded in a dual-phase manner, with either you requesting 1 to 2 years of mentored postdoctoral research training and career development, and then transitioning up to 3 years of independent research support. And this comes into play once an independent tenure track or equivalent faculty position has been secured. With respect to the transition from the K99 to the R00, except for in unusual circumstances, and this is something that you would reach out to your program officer to discuss if you cannot make that transition, the thought is that this will happen seamlessly, that you'll go from the K99 to the R00. Once again, this transition is not automatic. You will submit an application package as outlined in the transition part of the FOA, and internally, the BRAIN work group committee or review team will look it over administratively and decide if you have the position, the support, the environment to be able to transition to this R00 phase. This slide does a nice job of just outlining sort of an overview of the mechanism itself, and it also includes some of the salary information. So the career stage, once again, is that you would apply during your postdoc, then transition to faculty. The expectation is that it'll be less than 5 years of postdoctoral research experience at the initial application or resubmission, but parental leave or other well-justified leave for personal or family situations would be considered. The other thing that I should mention is that if you've spent time in clinical training or research, that only the research portion is considered in this 5-year eligibility cutoff. For the K99 phase, it's up to 2 years. Your salary or the budget that you will work with your sponsor grants office to put together, the salary must be consistent with institutional salary structure. The research support will be up to $25K, and we will also add the budget allowance to be $5,000 for meeting participation. A big part of the BRAIN initiative is a yearly meeting where the PIs, mentees, and NIH program staff come together to talk about progress within the BRAIN initiative, but also to share the research via poster sessions and talks. Any of the awardees of the K99 R00 will be included in this activity. Therefore, $5,000 is added for the meeting participation. For the R00 phase, it'll be up to 3 years, as mentioned, and there you can request up to $249,000 in total costs. The costs can include salary, research costs, supplies, travel, equipment, fringe, and indirects, and all of the details are outlined in the FOA. So before you start to actually even begin to type or put pen to paper, there are some things that you'll want to take a step back and think about. The first thing is really defining your research or your career goals. Explicitly define what you hope to get out of this mechanism and how this will launch you to the next step of your career or your junior faculty position. The second is to outline the techniques, the skills, the knowledge, and the relationships that will be needed to actually help achieve these career goals that you've defined for yourself. The third is to perform a skills or a gap analysis. What from the skills that you've described have you already mastered, and what are the skills that need to be developed? Number 4, defining your research plan. How will these 2 phases of your research, the K99 and the R00, build off your existing strengths to provide you with the skills, techniques, and data that will actually facilitate your success as a postdoc and then to the next step? And in terms of building a career development plan that is tailored to your needs, you and your mentor, who should be working with you across all of these steps, will have to outline that so that the reviewers can get a sense of what is the added value and how will this mechanism leverage you to the next step in your career. So through all of this, seek the guidance that you need and the mentorship that is needed. Now let's go to the application components. And in the next, before we even start with what are the A to Z of the application components, you may have noticed that there are two different FOAs for this program. This is something that you will see across NIH, especially for the Career Development Awards, is that you'll see a clinical trial not allowed versus a clinical trial required. You can use the 4 following questions to determine the difference between a clinical study and a clinical trial. The first question is, does the study involve human participants? The second, are the participants prospectively assigned to an intervention? Is the study designed to evaluate the effect of the intervention on the participants? And is the effect being evaluated a health-related biomedical or behavioral outcome? If you answer yes to any of these questions, by the NIH definition, you would meet the definition of a clinical trial. But it's really important that, as I've mentioned, this is a new requirement and this is a new way of operating and handling this clinical definition. It's really important that you take the time to reach out and talk to your mentor or an NIH program officer if you have any doubts or you just have questions about this. Given that many of you, we anticipate, perhaps have never even applied for an NIH training award before, don't be afraid to reach out to us with questions that may come up, especially for this part of the FOA development. So once you decide which FOA you'll actually be using, you'll have this general guidance that you see before you when it comes to the SF424. Really, I cannot iterate this enough. You want to read the entire FOA. You don't want to just glance at it. You just don't want to focus on one section of the FOA or the funding opportunity announcement. You really want to read through it. And then after you're done putting your application together, you actually want to read the review criteria and judge for yourself, did you present the information that would be needed to answer those review questions? The other thing that you'll want to do is to read the Career Development K instructions of the SF424 application. This applies to the K, or the Career Development sections that you'll be applying to. You want to follow the page limits in the NIH table. It's really frustrating to not be able to have your application reviewed to technical errors versus something that actually has to do with the scientific content. So you want to make sure that you follow those guidelines. The other thing that you want to position yourself for now, given that, as I mentioned before, many of you, this may be your first time applying for an NIH application or grant, is to get an NIH Commons account. You want to do this at least a month before the application deadline. And the final thing is that even though this may be new to you, or this may be the first time you're applying for a Career Development Award, know that within your institution, and probably even within your mentor, that there exists expertise, so don't be afraid to ask questions. Also, get to know your organization's authorized representative, or the person who is assigned to assist with grant applications. They will also be helpful guiding you in preparing and putting this together from the technical aspects. With respect to definitions of roles, you will see sort of the language of the NIH come into play. You want to be sure that in how you designate people, that the function is actually serving the purpose that is outlined in terms of the NIH definitions, and that you and the people that you designate their roles, that you're all on the same page in terms of identifying someone as a collaborator versus an advisory committee member. Some of these definitions will have different responsibilities in terms of whether a Biosketch is needed or a certain document is needed. And so you'll want to, as you begin to put this together, refer to this chart to help you in guiding sort of those definitions in the role. The thing that we should have mentioned is that after this webinar, we will be posting the slides, and the talk itself will be archived for your reference so that you come back later as you begin to put your application together. With respect to reference letters, 3 reference letters are required, up to 5 are accepted. If letters are missing, the application will not be reviewed. You want to choose individuals that are familiar with you, but not directly involved in the application or the research part itself. Notify your references early and give them plenty of time to submit these letters, and ensure that when you reach out to them that they have your current CV and the aims of the grants. Another tip is to make sure that the people that you ask for reference letters actually can speak to your science and your research and will give you strong letters. Reviewers will really take into account these reference letters in terms of judging the whole overall application. Late letters are not accepted for peer review, and you must include a cover letter that contains a list of these references when you submit the application. In these webinar slides, sections refer to where you may find instructions in the application guide. Some of these instructions are in the general application guide, and some will be in this specific career development or K guide that I mentioned before. There is a hierarchy in the instructions when you apply to NIH. First, there's the NIH application guide, which gives generic instructions. Then there are specific instructions for the various types of applications. For example, in this brain diversity K99 R00 FOA. If there is a difference in the advice being offered, remember that the FOA or the program announcement overrules the application guide. So please follow the FOA. There are also some mandatory forms that you must complete. For research involving human subjects, vertebrate animals, human stem cells, select agents, what you choose in one form affects the other forms. So basically, it's a decision tree that will then populate what you have to answer. We will now offer some guidance about these topics at the end of the talk, but for this next step, Dr. Nancy Desmond will take sort of a deeper dive into what you can expect for the second bullet, that is the Career Development Award Supplemental Form.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. So now as we dive into the deep water of the Career Development Award forms, you can see here that there are 5 sections to this component of the application, and I'm going to go through them sequentially. And keep in mind that all of the pieces here should fit together, be well integrated, be consistent in terms of the story you're telling. For example, you don't want your mentor to say one thing in that section that contradicts what you have said in the candidate section. So the first section is about the candidate and goals for career development. The first component is about your background. You should talk about your scientific history, if you will, describing the research that you've conducted in the past and how that all integrates into what you propose to do in the K99. If there's been a change in your research direction, it might be useful here to talk about that change and the rationale that you had for making it. The second section is career goals and objectives. This is where you would describe your short-term and long-term career goals, and this can be a place to justify the need for this additional period of career development by describing how the 2-year award will enable you to finish developing and/or expanding your skill set so that you're able to conduct the independent research that you wish to conduct in the future. This section should talk about both the K99 and the R00 phase, include a timeline. We encourage you to have clear milestones so that are consistent with what your mentor would talk about, so that it's easy for you and the reviewers to understand how you propose to progress in a realistic time window through your goals for the K99. It's also important to be explicit about how the research you're doing is relevant to the BRAIN initiative and why you are interested in the thematic areas of the BRAIN initiative. In the candidate's plan for career development during the award period, you want to describe the new or enhanced research skills and knowledge that you're going to acquire during the K99 period. And there are a number of different things that can be part of a career development plan. For example, you'll have structured activities, of course. You might have methods training. There will probably be professional development activities as well. For example, that you may propose to take a grant writing course that's going to get you well prepared for writing your first R01 or for small foundation grants in the future. There may be coursework that is essential for you to take during the K99 so that you are well positioned for your independent research career. Of course, you're also going to be consulting with your mentors on a regular basis. You want to describe the frequency of those meetings. If you have if you decide to have an advisory committee, I would recommend that you plan to have regular meetings with the advisory committee as a collective, not to meet with each one of them just individually, but to get everybody together, whether that be virtually or face-to-face. In addition, you want to be thinking about how you're going to be communicating the results or the products of what you're doing during both phases. So that may be attending specific meetings where you would be presenting. It will also, of course, be including writing manuscripts and getting them published. In addition, you're going to have your plans for research grant funding during the R00 phase would be part of your timeline, of course, because there is an expectation that by the end of the R00 award period, you would have independent NIH funding. And finally, during the K99 phase, you're also going to be on the job market. And so this is also an important component of your timeline, thinking about and preparing to submit job applications, interviewing for faculty positions, negotiating an offer, setting up your lab, and getting everything rolling. So you need to have a very specific plan. The plan will build on the strengths that you already have. And here is also where you're going to address the gaps that you have identified in your skill set, whether that be technical skills or on the professional development continuum. As I said before, a timeline is really important, and a timeline can be a good way to figure out if you have an overly ambitious career development plan, because it will certainly highlight how packed your program is. You want to also finally describe how and how often your mentors will be evaluating your progress. Your timeline and milestones are a great way to help them understand what your goals are. So in the research plan section, keep in mind that this research plan is for both phases of this award program, both the K99 and the R00. And that both of these phases need to be related to the goals of the BRAIN initiative. Typically, this research plan section is going to have an overarching hypothesis that will drive the proposed research. There will be specific aims that you will propose that will address this hypothesis, and ideally these aims are not dependent entirely on one another because they can lead to a real problem for the peer reviewers. It's very important to describe the methods, the approaches, and the techniques that you're going to be using in each of these aims, to discuss potential problems and how you're going to plausibly address them or manage them. Finally, you want to also consider and describe what you will do if the initial approach doesn't work. Is there an alternate approach that you could take to address the question? And as is true in all NIH applications these days, you need to address the scientific premise for the work that you're proposing to do, its significance, the innovation, scientific rigor, and biological variables. You can learn more about scientific premise and what NIH means by scientific rigor and biological variables in the SF424 application guide, and some approaches to dealing with those. I would just mention that biological variables includes consideration of sex as a biological variable, and I would also discourage you from overstating the significance of the work that you propose to do. You are not going to solve your long-term research objective in the period of the K99 R00. Another required component of the application is training in the responsible conduct of research. You have a one-page to describe the 5 components of your instructional plan: format, subject matter, faculty participation, duration of instruction, and the frequency of that instruction. NIH expects that there will be substantive face-to-face instruction as part of training in responsible conduct of research. And this is a piece that you want to plan to do during the K99 phase of your planned training. In the next section, I'm going to talk now about the research plan. And as I alluded to before, the strongest research plans will have a clear rationale for the proposed studies. Often, the specific aims are hypothesis-driven, but not all science, of course, is hypothesis-driven. Some science is very, very discovery-based, and in the BRAIN initiative, there may be very interesting projects that are proposing efforts to develop, enhance, or refine tools and methods that are relevant to the BRAIN initiative. I mentioned before about the importance of making your aims independent of one another. This is because if aim 2 is dependent upon aim 1 and aim 1 turns out in exactly the opposite manner than you expect, you're kind of dead in the water. And the reviewers will figure that out. It's very important to articulate the significance of the research you're proposing to do. And keep in mind that not all reviewers are not going to be experts in the exact area of your research program. So important to describe this in a way that is understandable to an intelligent person, but who may not be an expert in your specific area. Why is this project important to accomplish? Again, reminding you to describe the methods you will use and include a detailed analytic plan, including power analyses. This is part of conducting rigorous research, as well as how you will interpret the data, potential pitfalls, and alternative approaches. This is where data rigor, biological variables, as well as the premise for the proposed work all fit together. So, continuing on about the research plan, you want to be clear in thinking about and presenting the research plan as to how the research plan and your career development plan are well integrated. so that the research plan is enhancing your skill set and setting you up for independence. You certainly want to propose your training, and the training-related specific research aims will be during the K99 phase. You do not want to be proposing training during the R00 phase. Certainly you want to be clear about your role in collecting the preliminary data that are presented in your application. If you're showing preliminary data from a lab mate, you want to give credit to the appropriate individual. It's very important to have the discussion with your PI or your mentor as to the ownership of the project and what you will be able to take with you to an independent position. This conversation should happen before you submit the application if you haven't already had it as a postdoc. And certainly what you're going to be proposing in the R00 phase is going to be yours. You will own it, and that will be driving the development of your independent research program. Be clear about both K99 and R00 activities. What are you going to propose to do in each phase of the award, and be clear about what is in which phase. You want to provide evidence for the reviewers that what the research you're proposing to do has legs, if you will, that it's viable in the long term. It's setting a strong foundation, not a wobbly little stool on which to build your research as an independent scientist. So there are also a number of, some may call them less interesting sections of the research plan. Vertebrate animals, this is a section you complete if you are proposing to use vertebrate animals. There are 4 required sections. Take this seriously. Do not use this, however, to include information that belongs in the body of the application. Select agents need to be described. There is a resource sharing section that may well be appropriate for the research you're doing. And finally, the important authentication of key biological and or chemical resources. This is a section that is part of the rigor and reproducibility required in NIH applications. So authentication of these resources includes, but is not limited to, cell lines, specialty chemicals, antibodies, and other biologics. And there is guidance for you in the application instruction guide about what to include here. Basically, you're going to be describing the methods to ensure the identity and validity of these key resources. This is a one-page section also. The next section is about the other folks who are important players in your application, your mentor, co-mentors if there are any, consultants, and collaborators. There's a lot of information, of course, in the application guide about this. But to just highlight the key points, the mentor and each co-mentor provide a plan or statement, if you will, that is 6 pages in total. Either each mentor and co-mentor will provide a separate statement, or there will be a single statement that is collectively written by the group, filling the up to 6 pages. And I think I would recommend, if you have a single statement from the mentor and co-mentors as a collective, that it be very clear at the beginning of that section. It's explicitly stated that this was written by the group, if you will, because otherwise reviewers may think that the primary mentor has written this and that none of the co-mentors have written anything. It's very important in here that the mentor be clear about what you will be able to take with you to your independent research laboratory. That assurance is taken very seriously by the NIH and must be explicitly written by the mentor. This is also the section where you would include letters of support from other individuals with other roles who will be contributing to your K99 R00 project. So your collaborators, if there are other contributors or consultants. And you can refer back to the slide that Michelle talked about that mentioned all of the roles for various individuals, and that will help you understand whether you need a letter of support or not for that individual. But note that if you have an advisory committee, that all of the members of that committee must provide letters of support as well. Moving on to mentoring. This is a mentored career development award. So by definition, mentoring is a critical component of this application. The reviewers are going to be looking for evidence that your mentor and the co-mentors have a strong track record of training and transitioning postdocs like you to independent research careers. If you have a mentor who has no track record of transitioning a postdoc to an independent research career, then a co-mentor who does have that experience is essential to your project, to your application. Mentors want to demonstrate their scientific productivity, their publications, the adequacy of funding to help support your K99 research, because the funds that are provided in this award are likely insufficient to support all of the costs. It's noted here that if you have a mentoring team, it's great if the individuals on that team have complementary and experience rather than all of them having experience in the same area and then leaving you with a gap. You want to provide, they should provide details about how they're going to be interacting with you, the frequency of meetings, and the mode of the meetings. Your mentor should take a look at the review criteria in drafting their letter so that their letter or statement fully addresses the points that the reviewers need to consider. And finally, the mentor also provides a mentoring plan as to how they are going to help you achieve your career development and research goals and transition to research independence. Finally, we get to the last section, environment and institutional commitment to you. So the institution that is submitting the application on your behalf must provide a document on letterhead from the chair or head of the group describing the institutional commitment to you and to your career development, independent of the receipt of this award. And keep in mind that this letter should also state that you will have at least 75% of your research, of your time protected so that you will be able to conduct the proposed research and career development during the K99 phase. This particular section should discuss how the institution is going to assist you in transitioning to the R00 phase. For example, they may have some great programs at the institution that, for example, programs that have titles like Preparing Future Faculty that would benefit you. I want to document the existence of a well-established research program relevant to your area of interest, describe the facilities and opportunities available during the K99 award phase, as well as any unique features of the environment that may benefit you. And so now I'm going to turn this back over to Lauren, who's going to take you further and deeper into the application.
Thank you, Nancy. So I'm just going to touch on a couple little pieces in all the other forms that go along with this application. So in the R&R Senior Key Person Profile, if you remember that you as the applicant is going to be the PD or the PI, it's really important to review the sample Biosketch and actually spend some time on your Biosketch. particularly the personal statement and your contributions to science sections. This is the place for you to really establish your narrative and establish sort of your achievements as a scientist, and reviewers spend a good deal of time looking at these sections. And so it's important also that your Biosketch fits in with your career development plan. It fits in with what your mentor has said about you. It fits in with your letters of support, that all of these pieces come together to tell the same story. For your sponsor and your co-sponsor, if you have one, their role is going to be other professional, and then you're going to write either sponsor or co-sponsor in the other project roles category field. And you must include the current and pending support pages for each mentor and co-mentor. And so Nancy had mentioned that the research funding in this award, especially in the K99 phase, mentored phase, is not going to be enough likely to support the entirety of your research. So you need to demonstrate that your mentor has the funds to support the research part of your project. In addition, although foreign institutions are not allowed to apply, foreign components are permitted. And if you have questions about what is the difference between a foreign component and a foreign institution, please feel free to contact us. You also will need 2 additional attachments that are listed in the FOA. So one is the BRAIN initiative relevance. So like Michelle said, you have to include a description of the relationship of your proposed research in this grant to one or more of the specific goals in the BRAIN 2025 report that Mariah explained earlier. And this is a very important piece because if it's not BRAIN relevant, we cannot fund it through this mechanism. And so this is why we encourage you to send your specific aims to a program official before starting, so that we can make sure that this is the appropriate mechanism for you. You will also need to have a certification letter from your institutional official on institutional letterhead that certifies that you're eligible to apply to this FOA. For the salary on the budget form, you're going to provide your actual base salary, person months, requested salary, and fringe for the candidate only. For the direct costs, you're going to enter the total research development support being requested for the K99 period, and then you're going to have to enter an indirect cost is set at 8% for all career development awards. That'll be different in the R00 phase, but you don't know where you're going to end up in the R00 phase yet, so you can't fill that part out. For the project summary and the abstract and the project narrative, that should encompass both phases, same as your specific aims encompass both phases. You're going to need your bibliography and your references cited, same as any other grant. But for the facilities and other resources and the equipment phase, you only need to talk about the K99 phase because, again, you don't know where you will be during the R00 phase. Another piece that's really important is the new THS Human Subjects and Clinical Trials Information Form. All applicants must use this form. So even if you're not using human subjects, you need to answer the form that says, are human subjects allowed, yes or no? This is a new form, and so it's important that you follow the instructions carefully. And so if you're looking at someone's application, it might look a little different than yours. And so be sure, if you have any questions, please reach out to us, but just make sure that you follow the instructions carefully here. And then finally, after you have a draft of your application, it's very important that you check what you've written against the scored review criteria. These are listed in the FOA, and they encompass 5 points. And these are the questions that reviewers are going to be asking themselves about your application in order to give you a score. So they're going to be looking at the candidate, which is you, the career development plan or your career goals and objectives, your research plan, mentor, co-mentors, consultants, collaborators, and the environment and institutional commitment to the candidate. And these pieces, they're going to be located in all different parts of your application, the answers to these questions. So it's really important that all parts of your application work together to answer the questions that are in the scored review criteria. And they are slightly different between the clinical trial not allowed and clinical trial required, so just make sure you're looking at the right FOA. And then the last thing that I wanted to touch on is something that we have found that not everybody knows about, but after you submit your application, you are allowed to provide updates no later than 30 calendar days prior to the peer review meeting, but only certain information is accepted. So the things that are most likely to be relevant to you are if you have an article that was accepted for publication since submission of the application, if you have your sponsor or co-sponsor has new research funding, you have a change in the sponsor or other senior key persons, or if you have a new patent. So any of those you can send to the scientific review officer. There's a couple of other things that are also allowed, which are written in the notice, but these are the ones that are most likely to be relevant to you. Okay, so now we have a couple minutes for questions. So if you have any questions, please write them in the Q&A box, and we'll go through and answer as many as we can in the couple of minutes that we have left. If we don't get to your questions, please email us. We are happy to hear from you. Okay. So our first question, Nancy, can you talk a little bit about the factors that an applicant should be considering when deciding when in this 5-year eligibility window a postdoc should submit their K99 application?
Sure. So there are at least 2 considerations I can think of off the top of my head. The first is that I would encourage you to allow time to submit a resubmission application, which means don't plan to submit for the very last deadline for which you are eligible, because then you have no resubmission opportunity. The second, and perhaps kind of counterbalancing consideration, is that you need to know what you want to do as you begin to initiate your independent research program. And it's difficult to put together R00 aims if you don't know what you want to do as you begin to develop that program. So you need to kind of balance between, if you apply too early, you may really not have a clear enough idea about the direction in which you want to go. But if you wait till the very end, you may know exactly what you want to do, but the reviewers may, at that point, find that you may really have a really weak rationale for needing additional mentor training. So it's a bit of a teeter-totter, if you will, and you want to try to make that teeter-totter be as flat as you can, if you will. There is another consideration, which I have just forgotten, so we won't mention that.
So about how long would somebody need to allow for a resubmission?
A year?
A year.
Probably about a year, because keep in mind that if you submit an application, that generally the review doesn't occur for at least 4 or 5 months, and then you can't submit a resubmission application until you have received your summary statement, which will take another month-ish. So, and if you need time to develop, to address the reviewer's concerns, you're going to need a little time to do that also. So certainly at least 9 months, but perhaps more realistically a year.
Michelle, can you talk a little bit about how to choose a mentor and what roles there are for mentors on the grant?
Sure. And so for most of these, I think that normally you will already be in a research or lab situation where you may have an existing relationship or a mentor. Some of the things that you want to think about is in terms of, do you need just this one person, or given the research that you're trying to discover for your own independence, would it make sense to incorporate a mentoring team? And so there can be several different types of formats. You could have a mentor and a co-mentor. You could have this mentoring team approach where there may be other people brought in that specifically address the research or the scientific skills, techniques, areas that you want to gain that perhaps your mentor doesn't necessarily have the expertise in. In terms of this specific FOA and the BRAIN initiative, you want to make sure that the mentor has an awareness in this space, and in all best scenarios, perhaps maybe already a part of it, but that's not a requirement. That is to say that if you, on your own, through your own research, have sort of segued into this area and perhaps your mentor hasn't, that's fine. But you do want to place around yourself people that can give you that required guidance, expertise, and knowledge, because reviewers will look for that. The other thing that Nancy had mentioned is beyond just the expertise in the scientific area that they'll look for, they'll also look for in terms of training for the K99 phase. Has this person had a track record of getting people to that next step? And so if you have a mentor that perhaps does not have the seniority to actually have that track record yet, once again, you may want to consider having a co-mentor who has that history and experience. The key here for all of these things that I've said is that it has to be real. You don't want to go around just putting on names of department chairs or Nobel laureates to make the application look good. You want it to be real. You want the letters to reflect that they actually know you and that they actually are invested in your success.
Ned, can you talk a little bit about how unique your proposed K99 research should be compared to your mentor's research? And also how an applicant should be thinking about sort of that transition process and taking their work with them in the context of the BRAIN initiative?
So this is a general question for the K99 mechanism. And I think that it's one that you have to be thinking about very carefully. Of course, you're paid by your mentor, and you're expected to be doing research that's contributing to their project. But at the same time, you have to be taking the longer view and saying, I'm going to be trained in particular techniques and approaches in the K99 phase, and my mentor will be able to take credit for the work that I do during that period. But here is the work that I want to do that branches out. And typically that branching out is something that you would propose for the R00 phase. Now, you can discuss this with your mentor, and it's possible that the branching out will be a process rather than a discrete step. But I think that you know, the R00 phase is intended for that.
And Nancy, can you just touch on a little bit the differences between this K99, the BRAIN K99, and the parent K99?
Sure. So there are a number of differences between the parent K99 FOA and this BRAIN RFA. The first is the number of years of postdoctoral experience that you can have at the time of any application. For the BRAIN K99 R00, it's 5 years, whereas the parent is 4 years. There is an individual eligibility question issue also, where there are differences between the parent and the BRAIN Initiative RFA. First, for the BRAIN Initiative RFA, everyone who applies must be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident at the time of award. That is not the case for the parent K99, where non-U.S. citizens are eligible to apply. The other difference between, in terms of candidate eligibility, relates to other aspects related to the brain. K99 RFA requires an individual to be a member of an underrepresented racial or ethnic group, be an individual with a disability, or be female. Whereas all of those considerations are just fine for the parent K99, but individuals who do not meet any one of those eligibility buckets, if you will, are also eligible for the parent K99. And I think those are the major differences. There could be some modest budget differences, but I would not consider those to be in any way a determinant of which FOA to apply to. Oh, and obviously the other big difference between the parent K99 and the brain RFA is that for the brain K99, your proposed research project needs to fall within the scientific scope of the brain initiative. And while that would be fine for a parent K99 application, a parent K99 application can also fill a whole lot of other scientific space beyond the brain initiative.
And Michelle, can you talk a little bit about the roles of the different institutes that are signed on to this mechanism in regards to the review and funding plan?
Yes. And so, as Nancy alluded to, the different NIH institutes do and share a space within the Brain Initiative research, but this really, the Brain Initiative itself is an umbrella for all of these individual ICs to manage this initiative itself, meaning that all of the decisions, the considerations for funding, the pay plan will be decided by this Brain Initiative internal work group. So all of the questions in terms of the specific aims, the way that we've handled them is that we've had one entry point, and that will either come to me or Dr. Natali, who you see on the slide, and we will decide if it is a fit or not for the Brain Initiative. But keep in mind, all of those other ICs that you saw listed on my title slide, they are incorporated in the decision-making. They will see the application, and so their thoughts about the process are incorporated into that. So it's not necessary for applicants to, if you feel as though your research may be more NIMH or more NIDA or more NINDS or any of the other institutes, it's not necessary for you to contact them and us. You should fully rely on this this one point of contact to be your connection to getting the feedback for these other ICs. And so as you reach out to us, one of the things that we will always ask you is to send a draft of the specific aims in your CV. The thought is that we don't want you to make those decisions by yourself in terms of whether your research is a fit or not for the Brain Initiative. We want to have those pre-conversations so that by the time your application comes in, we could have more certainty about it being a fit. Because the only things that will be reviewed and that will be considered for the review will be applications that fit within the Brain Initiative. If they fit within any other IC's own specific criteria or goals, they should be sent to them.
Okay, well, I think that's all the time that we have. So thank you, everyone, for joining us for this webinar. I'm sure that you still have questions that we weren't able to get to, so please email us with any questions that you may have, and we're happy to answer them. Thank you.